Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this year's College Share, Navigating the College Transition with Confidence. My name is Laura Spaeth. I'm the Vice President for Family Support and Adult Literacy at Nye Health Education Center, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker this evening. Our speaker this evening is Evan Weinberger. He is the President and CEO of Staying Ahead of the Game, which is a Houston-based academic coaching and tutoring company he founded in 2006, with a focus on helping students build the executive functioning skills they need to be successful in the classroom and beyond. The core components of his program include organization, time management, and influencing the perceptions of others. He is a national speaker and particularly enjoys presenting to parents, counselors, and educators all over the country about the power of executive functioning skills and the most useful ways to assist students of all ages in getting the most out of school and achieving their goals. Staying Ahead of the Game has several offices around Texas, but he also has co-founded Illuminos in 2016 to bring the award-winning and research-driven program to major cities outside of Texas, beginning with the Washington, D.C. metro area. So tonight he's going to be speaking with us about navigating the college transition with confidence. We are so excited, and Evan, we will turn it over to you.
Sure. Love Nye House. Thank you, Lara. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure. I'm going to share my screen here and jump into our presentation. I want to say a few words about questions. Love questions. I hope you have lots of them. However, as I'm speaking in the Q&A box, if you can put your questions, Lara will come in at the end and help to moderate a little Q&A session. So I know we've got about an hour blocked out. I will try to present and wrap up right around that 45-minute mark to allow for some questions. So today we're talking about the sometimes scary, but also very exciting transition to college and making that transition a successful one. So college, man, what a big topic. I preach all over the country about how the biggest transition kids make in their entire lives is that transition from high school to college. And so first, what I want to do is, here's an overview of what we're going to talk about. First, I want to talk about what makes that transition to college so monumental. What is it that makes that college transition so big, and why I share far and wide that it's the biggest transition kids make in their entire lives. So we'll talk about that transition. We'll touch on new playground, new playmates, different educational paradigm, how the scaffolding is largely gone. We'll talk about mitigating dropout rates. So I hope you're seated for this, but we'll talk about some statistics. Why do students drop out? So we'll touch on some of the most common reasons. It won't be an exhaustive list, but it'll give you some of the highlights of some of the most common reasons we see students drop out. And what are some things that you can do, whether you're a parent, you're a professional who's also a parent and you have children, or you are supporting children or young adults who are looking at making that transition either very soon or in the coming few years. What are some things that you can do both directly and then encourage kids to do so indirectly? And then my favorite topic, we'll talk about executive function and how that plays a critical role in kind of differentiating those students who make that transition successfully and those students who fall a little bit short and need to restart. So in terms of executive function, we'll talk about what that is, what it means, a definition. What does executive function do? How is it related to learning? Where does it take place in the brain? Where are your executive functions or executive decision making? Where does that occur? And then we'll touch on some executive function driven tools that college students over and over again. I've been doing this for, the better part of 2 decades now. So I'm old enough to where, and I've been doing this long enough to where I have students who I've been supporting since they were young, who have now gone to college and finished, and things that they have reported to me that were the most helpful. I'm going to go over some of those tools. So first, what makes this college transition such a big deal? What makes this college transition so monumental, right? And so new playground and new playmates. What does that mean? So oftentimes when kids go to college, some stay local, but even if you're not going out of state, even if you're staying in state, in most cases, when kids go off to college, they are uprooting themselves from that place that is familiar, right? That playground that's familiar, where you have friends and familiarity, and you know the streets and the roads, you know, et cetera. You know where you get haircuts, get groceries, pick up, you know, medication from the pharmacy. Um, and then you're leaving to go to this new area, this new playground, right? And then new playmates. You are leaving a lot of your friends, those people that are familiar to you, and including your scaffolding and your support system, which we'll get to in a minute. Also, the educational paradigm is different. So we're going to get into that and specifically how it's different. And then the scaffolding is largely gone. The scaffolding is largely gone. So, you know, what does that actually mean? And we'll dive into that a bit more. And the name of the game is, how do we help students? How do we equip students with the skills and the tools they need to juggle it all successfully? So, new playground and new playmates. What do I mean by that? So let's talk about the campus. That's all new, unfamiliar. So there's a library, a registrar's office, and there are things that students need or should be doing in both of those places. Classrooms, and the classrooms aren't a few doors down from each other or even a few hallways away from one another. Oftentimes they're in different buildings at different ends of the campus. Resident halls, that's a whole new concept, right? This idea of this little studio apartment or this one kind of room, and there's multiple kids kind of living there. Sometimes you have suite mates where there's an additional couple kids and maybe you share a bathroom. And so those resident halls, that's a whole new concept for students. Recreation stuff, what you do for fun, right? When you transition to college, you know, in your hometown, what you do on the weekends for fun, you know, et cetera. But all of a sudden, now you got to learn the campus and what are you doing on campus and also around campus. Support services, that looks a little bit different. You can't just walk down the hall and knock on your learning specialist door, the counselor at school, and have a little chit chat about, you know, how do I organize better, right? How do I approach my teacher about this issue? It's a much more proactive process in college. Even the mailroom, right? People miss you. They're going to send you mail. I don't even know if you can do this anymore, but I used to get medication and things like through the mail. So that mailroom is really important. And it's this little city that we call a campus, and some are much bigger than others, but the whole idea and concept can be overwhelming. Navigating a new city, that's a big deal too. Basic needs that just kind of happened for you pre-college, right? So groceries just appeared in the fridge in many cases. Maybe you'd go with mom or dad to the grocery store and pick up things that you needed. Pharmacy, your medications, magic coffee shops. You're navigating a new city. You got to figure out the ins and outs of that city. Where can I hang out and go get coffee? Maybe post up and do some work. Doctor's offices. What happens if you get sick? You have to know who you're going to call, and you know, you a regular doctor like a GP. But what if something else happens? And what's on your insurance plan? And you know, et cetera. So navigate. All this is navigating a new city: church, temple, synagogue. If that's, you know, something that's going to be a part of your life on a regular basis or even irregular basis, finding a place where you feel comfortable, where you can go and join as a student, you know, et cetera. That's part of navigating a new city. And then banks, you know, money. Every family sets up kind of a different system or program, but maybe some students are working and making their own money, but a bank, you know, it's not whatever bank you were using pre-college. If you went to the bank regularly, they may or may not have a branch. There might be some local banks. I know that was the case when I went to college. And then new friends. That's a whole other animal, right? So you left a lot of your friends. Now there's dorms, there's classes where you have friends, extracurricular activities where there's different people. No two kids on a college campus have the exact same schedule. right? That's the complete opposite pre-college, where all of a sudden, most of your friends, you follow the herd when the bell rings, and you usually end up in the right place, even if you're half asleep or not feeling well, right? Now you have to be aware of your schedule, and there isn't another person on campus with that exact same schedule. Clubs, if you want to get involved in things on campus, that's something that now you have to go and seek out. Greek life, some schools have this, most do, some do not. But is that something that's for you? And the timing of when to get involved in that. Work, some students are working and also playing sports, whether it's on a recreational basis or actually for the school. They may even have a sports related scholarship. They're a part of a D1, D2, D3 school. And so sports, making new friends is definitely something that makes this new playgrounds, new playmates, this college transition really big. And then finally, self-care needs, right? So these are things that kids don't think of either. Hygiene and mental health and sobriety, and cleaning and laundry and wellness, overall wellness, and like a barbershop, haircuts. Where are you going to go handle all of those things? So now that you are independent, you flee the coop, so to speak. Students are on their own to deal with these things, right? So all of this contributes to this idea of new playground and new playmates. Now let's zoom in on this educational paradigm and how that also represents a huge change from pre-college to college, okay? So one is you have much more infrequent feedback, right? So there's fewer assignments. In college, your courses are, in most cases, a semester long. And during that semester long course, you may have 2 tests and a paper, or 3 tests and a final exam, and that's it. So do that math. That means that it's possible that any one test that you go in to take is, number one, covering a lot more information, which we'll get to, but it also may be 25% of your entire grade for the class. And so it's much more difficult to recover from making poor decisions and not preparing appropriately than it is, say, in high school, where every other week you have a test. And if you don't prepare appropriately, if you mismanage your time, and you don't do as well as you would have hoped, you have a test a week or two later to try and bring up that grade, right? Also, daily assignments, those kinds of things. Pre-college, oftentimes your grade, there's daily work, homework, et cetera. You might have, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10 grades a week on top of tests every other week and quizzes on a weekly basis. That whole paradigm is different. And then it's a heavily test-based system, so that those little incremental homework assignments that would help you boost your grade and also make sure that you stay on track, read these 7 pages for class tomorrow. Now it's not 7 pages. Now it's read these 57 pages for class, and you're reading multiple chapters to prepare for a class. Also, I would call it unhurried grading, right? So oftentimes professors, they may or may not have TAs helping them, teachers assistants that are helping them. But if you call your kid and ask them when they go to college, hey buddy, how are you doing? You may get an answer of, Mom, Dad, I don't know. I don't know how I'm doing. And that may actually be true. They're not just being a teenager, right? It may actually be true. They've had a month of classes, but no major exams or anything yet. And they say, oh, well, I'm getting out of bed. I'm going to class. I think I'm reading everything that I'm supposed to read. I'm working through all the suggested homework, because now it's not homework that's due for a grade. It's suggested reading, suggested problem sets, et cetera. And teachers may take their times to grade those things. So in addition to having fewer actual touch points, it may take a few weeks for that grade to post. And so it may be quite a long time before you actually have feedback. Professors don't necessarily seek you out, right? Pre-college, if you're struggling in a class, it could be with executive function, some aspect of executive function, organization, or time management, or you're struggling to keep up with your notes, missed a few days of school, you've had a couple bad grades in a row, et cetera. A teacher may find you, they may call in the counselor may reach out to you, you might have a meeting, they may talk to your parents, et cetera, right? Now, that's all different. Professors are not going to reach out to you or seek you out if you miss class or if you have a poor grade, or and if they do, it may be an email, and it may be a general email that went out to 5 or 6 other students in the class that did particularly poorly on a major exam or something like that. So it could be a cookie cutter type of email. So a lot of that feedback that you would get from your teacher, noticing that you're struggling and who may proactively reach out to you, all of a sudden the table is turned. Um, and then broader assignments. So because there's fewer assignments, they cover a much bigger volume of material, of information. So it's not over, 20 or 30 pages of reading your exam. It may be over 100 plus pages worth of reading. There's also less instruction. So in college, they say for every 1 hour of formal instruction, so if you take a 3 hour class, usually that means Monday, Wednesday, Friday for an hour. That's a 3 hour class, or an hour and a half on Tuesday, Thursday, or a seminar type of format where once a week you have class for 3 hours, right? So you take a typical 3 hour class, um, there's less instruction. And for every 1 hour of instruction, you're supposed to spend 1 to, in some cases, 2 hours. So 1 to 2 hours outside of class for every hour of instructions at the college level, right? So that's a lot of time. Fewer incremental deadlines. And so teachers are no longer, when you have a paper, it's going to be an 8-page paper, 10-page paper, 12, 15-page paper, and you're going to have a month or longer. You might even have the whole semester to work on that paper. But pre-college, when you had a major assignment or project like that, the instructor would break it down into pieces. Your sources are due here, your outline is due here, you have note cards with quotes and things that you have to have by this date, right? Now students are on their own to actually break that big paper into small, manageable pieces and chunks. And students need to set their own deadlines, for that, incremental deadlines. They're no longer set for you. And then your courses are shorter, right? So they're semester-long courses, generally speaking, rather than year-long courses. So that means your instructor changes, by the way. It means that it's an accelerated pace. It means that there's less time to course correct when something goes wrong, right? So sure, you may not have a test every week or every other week. You might have a test once a month. But when your course is only 3.5 months long and you only have 3 tests, right? So there's less time, right? Less time to course correct. And then procrastination is a whole different animal once students go to college. I feel like all students have a propensity toward procrastination, and we can talk about brain development a little bit later in the presentation and why that is. But kids have a tendency to procrastinate, wait until the last minute to do things. And that may have worked pre-college to a degree, right? Even when you were a junior or senior in high school and the work was arguably the toughest work that you had, and the quantity, volume of work was some of the most work that you've had in a year of school, right? You could still wait till the last minute. It wasn't good practice, but you could wait till the last minute, potentially stay up, all or most of the night, and complete those things that you need to do in time to turn it in. You might be a zombie the next day. You might feel kind of numb all over, and you may crash right when you get home. But it was in the realm of possibility, not good practice, but in the realm of possibility. All of a sudden in college, if you aren't doing the regular suggested reading assignments, if you aren't doing the regularly suggested problem sets, in your chemistry class or biology class, et cetera, and interacting with that material. And then you decide the day before, oof, I have a major test tomorrow, right? Covering a lot of information. Man, I really need to engage, right? You go to engage and you realize that the sheer volume of work that you have to do, it's even if you stay up all night, it's not possible to get everything done. And so that is certainly different. And then in order to get professors help, they may not have office hours quite as regularly as your teachers pre-college have, right? So your teachers pre-college may have been available, 4 days a week or 5 days a week before school, and most of those days for a brief period after school. And some of them may have been available during lunch or study hall periods. Now, there aren't really quote unquote study hall periods. And it may be more difficult, more challenging to get professors' help. And you may not even be able to get the professors' help. There's a class at University of Texas, I think it was Psychology 101. Okay, there are two teachers that co-instruct that class, but there's over 1,000 students. You have to win the lottery just for the privilege of physically sitting in class. Otherwise, you have to watch it live over the computer virtually. And so it's very difficult to get FaceTime with that professor for extra help. Now, there are TAs in that class I was referring to in particular, and you may be able to get some time with that TA, but that process of getting help and the length of time between when you decide you need help, reaching out and actually getting that help could be much, much longer. And so what that means is that there's a lot more planning ahead that's required. Hint, an executive function skill. And then conflicting priorities, right? In college, it's a time to have fun and make new connections and to go live out some of your dreams, right? But you're also in school. That's your primary focus. So, and if you're involved in Greek stuff, then that's a whole nother set. And if you're involved in a club, that's a whole other set of meetings and things that group of students are doing together. And so you may have some conflicting priorities. So these are all ways that the educational paradigm, when you make that shift from pre-college or high school to college, that contribute to making that transition so big. And then the scaffolding is largely gone. Adult expectations, right? So you have to manage your time. And I'm not just talking about getting to class. I'm talking about when you wake up, when you go to sleep, when you have your meals, right? So it's managing really your life. So it's truly managing time, completing tasks. There are adult expectations for completing tasks without all these built-in reminders, et cetera. Independence. Try as a parent, try and call the registrar's office and get some insight about your kid's grades, right? They're going to say, nope, they're an adult. They may acknowledge that your child is a student there, but they're not going to give you any information, right? So kids are truly independent for everything: laundry, for managing their grades, for reporting things back to you, communicating their needs, et cetera. And then there's less forgiveness for, childish mistakes or behaviors. Everybody makes mistakes, but, you make a bad decision and involves some apologies. Maybe you get sent to the principal's office, kind of pre-college, talk about it, get sent to the counselor, talk about it again when you get home, et cetera. Totally different ballgame. Now there are formal policies, and some have student-run honor councils, right? Some are faculty-run honor councils, and there are formal processes if you get in trouble for something that you have to go through. And by the way, going back to that independence, students often are on their own. So a student will get an email about, you have to come before this committee and you have to present your case and you have to turn this in and fill out this form by this date and, et cetera. Trying to get accommodations, right? Those are things that students need to do independently on their own. Those emails are going only to the student. In most cases, if not all cases, they are not going to parents. And then there's no passive help, no emails home about grades. We talked about that. Office hours, those aren't necessarily on a regular schedule. They may be by appointment only. And that extra support, like we discussed, requires proactive communication, unstructured time. So kids overall are spending dramatically less time in class. Think about your schedule pre-college. School is a full-time job for kids. I tell kids they work just like I work. Your backpack is your briefcase. I have a briefcase. You have a backpack, and your full-time job is school. Well, that's easy to understand when you get dropped off at work or school at 7:30 in the morning, and then you get picked up, at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Kind of makes sense, right? And then all of a sudden there's not really that much time to manage. You might have practice for soccer or something, and then you come home and you have to do your homework and eat dinner and shower. And then at that time, it's time to go to bed, right? All of a sudden, college is still a full-time job. But students are only in class 12, 13, 15 hours maybe a week. And so that school still needs to be treated like your primary job and a full-time job. That's where that 1 to 2 hours outside of class for every 1 hour of classroom instruction, that's where that comes in, right? So dramatically less time in class. There aren't parental requirements, or if you have some, you can, certainly share them with your student, but you will have no way of knowing if they stick to them. Clearly a lot more freedom. And in terms of daily routine, right? Students are on their own to structure that daily routine. So there's not a routine that through some kind of diffusion or osmotic process, the house has a routine, so therefore student has a routine. They're not at home anymore. They are not in the coop. They are on their own practicing independence at college. So they need to set their own routine, not just for school stuff, but personal stuff too. And then distractions. Let's talk about distractions. So no two kids have the same schedule. We talked about that, but there are limitless distractions in college. Whether there's somebody throwing a party all the time, 24/7 somewhere, right? Somebody is celebrating just finishing a big test. Somebody is making poor decisions. Somebody is, playing video games. Somebody is out at bars, at concerts, whatever it may be. So time with friends, video games, sporting events, parties, and even sleep is sometimes easy for students to choose over going to class. And getting up, that can be a nightmare. I loved, and still to this day, actually, I love being up early in the morning. I hate the process of getting up early in the morning. That was very difficult for me. So happy in the Q&A, we can talk more about that. But are some examples of how the scaffolding is largely gone when kids go off to college. So let's talk about dropout rate. This is where I said, I hope you're sitting down. Depending on where you look, and I provided my source here, but depending on how you search, what words you use, and what source you go to, you will find that somewhere between a quarter and a third of undergraduate students do not complete their degree program. That's wild. A third. Line of 3 students, and one out of those 3 students, and you may not know which one, right? It might surprise you, is not going to complete their degree program. In fact, about 24%, about a quarter of first-time undergraduate freshmen drop out within 12 months, within their first 2 semesters. Okay, 40% of undergraduate students will drop out at least once before completing their degree. Okay, so they may go back and complete it, but they will drop out at least once before completing their degree. That's scary. 40 feels pretty close to 50% to me. That feels like just under half. And then 73% of undergraduate students who return to school will drop out again, right? So they dropped out once, they return to school. 73% of those students who go back to school and give it another shot, 73% will drop out again within 12 months. And then about a third, is 32.6%, is the average reduction in earnings for college dropouts than bachelor degree earners in terms of money, earning salaries over their lifetime. And so those are some alarming statistics. So if you feel some anxiety as a parent or as a professional who's helping to guide students as they make this transition, if you're nervous, there's validity to your feelings. Okay. So why do students drop out? And again, this is not an exhaustive list. Okay, this is not an exhaustive list, but I've picked some of the most common reasons. So in no particular order necessarily, the chosen college turns out not to be a good fit, right? Maybe you thought you did the research, you thought you did the visits, and it turns out the kids that you were matched up to meet with or do an overnight with presented the school differently than how it kind of really is, and it just turned out not to be a good fit. You thought sports weren't important to you, but you really missed that D1 sports, vibes at a school, or vice versa, right? You really wanted to be involved in sports, but the D1 is really, really competitive, and maybe you could have been more involved had you gone to a D3 school in terms of sports. So it was not a good fit. It could be learning differences too, so for whatever reason, it's not a good fit. problems with substance abuse, or I would even expand that to making poor decisions, right? And so without all that supervision that we were talking about, that kids are accustomed to and really depend on, um, and you have no way as a parent of really calling the school, and you're stuck, and the only feedback you're getting is what your kids give you. So they may have feelings of embarrassment about how they're doing. They may not be completely forthcoming about how they're doing, and by the time you realize it, it's too late, et cetera. So making poor decisions at college. Financial reasons, can't afford to finish. College is unfathomably expensive, unfathomably expensive. And so you might be able to afford the first year, but maybe there's some family changes or some personal issues. Your grades aren't high enough. You lose your scholarship, whatever it is, for whatever reason, you can't afford to finish, right? And the fourth is poor executive function or self-management skills, okay? So what are some things that you can do, whether you're a parent or a professional who are helping students looking at this transition in the near future, to ensure that you can try to line up some support services, consultants, work closely, have a few extra meetings with the person at school, schedule a few extra college visits, whatever it may be, to ensure that the college is a good fit, right? Give yourself more confidence that it's a good fit. Assemble a support team, right? So acknowledging that, in my opinion, still the biggest transition that kids make in their entire lives is that transition from high school to college. Assemble a support team. Sometimes, kids at that age don't necessarily want to talk to mom and dad or go to mom and dad about some of the struggles or issues that they're having, the problems they're running into. And so assemble a support team, even if you don't call them and actually schedule time with them, even creating like a list of contacts, which is the fourth thing here, in the event that something were to happen, whether it's academic, you need a tutor for this, or academic coach for this, or help with support with executive function, a list of doctors, a list of, kind of banks, nearby coffee shops, grocery stores, places to get your haircut, whatever. So having a list of contacts. Facilitate accommodations. If you have a student with learning differences who has been receiving accommodations and using them prior to college, every college campus, they may call it something different, but has something called a center for students with disabilities, or a support center, student support center, where they can, you provide certain documentation, your psychoeducational testing or neuropsych testing, and diagnoses, and you can ask for certain accommodations and go through the approval process, et cetera. So, those kinds of things don't happen quickly. Sometimes they have to be approved by a committee, and that committee may only meet once a month or twice a month. And so start that process early and make sure that students, will be able to continue having and receiving those accommodations that they, really needed prior to college. They can certainly continue those accommodations in college, but there are some channels that you have to go through, and it can take some time to get through those hoops. And then regular communication, right? And when I say regular, what I mean by regular is don't just reach out to kids when you have a question. And they shouldn't be reaching out to you only when they have a problem, right? There should be some kind of regular schedule where you communicate with your student while they're off at college, so that some of those troubles that they might be running into come up organically, right? You don't want a child to panic every time they hear from you, oh my gosh, something's wrong, right? And so have those regular times where you talk about good things, fun things, neutral things, as well as problems, struggles, ways that you may be able to support your student. And then indirectly, so these are things that you might have less of a direct hand in doing, but you can encourage your students to do, that will help not become one of those statistics, right? So encourage visits to learn more about the campus and the city. Some of the things about campus you really can't pre-learn, right? You have to wait till you start college and move there in order to figure it out. An example of that may be you might not get access, a year in advance to the school portals to get familiar with them and where teachers post assignments and things like that. You might not be able to do that early, right? But you can scope out where coffee shops are and where pharmacies are and places to get haircuts and grocery stores and fun places to eat on the weekends and, et cetera, right? And so whatever you can do beforehand, encourage students, help them with it, encourage them to do it, et cetera. Encourage researching professors. There are lots of websites out there, Rate My Professor, et cetera. Sometimes people don't write things that are so serious, but overall, it is helpful if you know that your child or student or a student knows about himself or herself that, hey, I a teacher that just lectures and doesn't write on the board, have handouts, or use PowerPoints, I struggle. I would struggle with that, right? So oftentimes, especially at medium and large universities, colleges, oftentimes there will be three, four, six, seven, eight different professors teaching the same course, and they offer that course at different times or on different days. Spend some time researching those professors, their interests, what kinds of things students who have taken their courses say about their teaching styles, et cetera, or their grading policies or late policies, those kinds of things, and how strict they are about some of those policies. You can get a lot of really great, rich information. Professors, especially tenured professors, oftentimes have been there a long time. So there's a lot of data on a lot of these instructors, right? Encourage setting meaningful goals. I still like SMART goals. And so encourage your students to set goals, sit down and do it with them, right? Use that SMART goals. Things need to be specific and measurable and actually attainable, right? So realistic, right? And they need to be relevant, time bound. So help create meaningful goals and encourage practicing independence. So that's something that's really big. If you're looking at college over the next year or two, at some point start taking over doing your own laundry, right? And then after that, may go to the grocery store and get your own groceries. After that, make your own haircut appointments, make your own doctor's appointments. Students can practice certain aspects or elements of independence prior to having to actually leaving and all of a sudden being thrown into the deep end and needing to be independent. At least they have some practice doing that, right? And then finally, and I have it in bold because we're getting into my favorite topic, which is executive function skills. Okay, so this is a huge predictor of making the successful transition to college. Okay, the brain develops from the back to the front. Okay, so this develops first, this part develops last. This is where our executive decision making, our executive function and function skills, this is where a lot of that is coming from, right in the front here. Well, girls develop that in their mid to late 20s. Boys, it's late 20s to early 30s. But how old are you when you go to college, and how old are you when you finish college? Most students who are on a normal trajectory are finishing college at 22, 23 years old, maybe 24. And so that means that neither boys nor girls have a fully developed frontal lobe here until after their undergraduate, completing their undergraduate degree in most cases. So again, in some ways, we are not wired. Students are not wired to make really, really good decisions super consistently until post-college years, right? But these are skills, and so they can be taught, they can be learned, they can improve with practice, as opposed to abilities, say. And so keep in mind, executive function skills, some folks may just naturally be more organized than others, may naturally have a better concept of time, right? But these are skills. So even a student who appears very disorganized can be taught better, more effective organizational skills. So let's talk about executive function for a minute. Defining executive function. So executive function and self-regulation skills are the mental processes that enable us to plan, focus attention, remember instructions, and juggle multiple tasks successfully. Okay, so think of it like an air traffic control system at one of these big, busy airports. It's that huge tower. They're managing all of these departures and arrivals on different runways that are going different directions all day and all night long. And I think we can agree that the cost of failure is really high if those planes bump into each other, right? people are going to get hurt or die, right? So the cost of failure is really high. We need a no fail kind of situation. So this executive function part of the brain, our executive functions really play that role for us in the brain, okay? We need the skills to filter distractions, prioritize tasks, set and achieve goals, and control impulses. And then this is important. Executive function skills provide critical supports for learning and development. And while we are not necessarily born with these skills, we are born with the potential to develop them through interaction and practice. Okay, and this is from the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. So again, reinforcement that we can teach these skills, we can learn these skills, we can improve upon these skills. So they allow us to control impulses and emotions, be flexible, plan and organize, help us to set goals and plan ahead, to self-manage and focus, follow multi-step instructions, and then on the execution side, actually meet goals and complete tasks. All of this is heavily tied to executive function. And then it enables us to manage ourselves without being told step by step what to do. I think we'd all agree that's an important component of being successful in college. I wanted to mention some of my favorite tools, okay, that students report back to me when they make that transition to college, or some of the most helpful tools that kept their heads above water, even during the toughest weeks and months of college, okay? So all students going to college, in my opinion, need a working computer and devices that sync to each other. So the phone needs to be talking to the computer. If they have a tablet, they need to be talking to each other. And then within that, this calendar system, I move kids from, productivity is really at the intersection of a task management system or planner, okay, or to-do list rather, and a calendar, right? So calendar is where you block out time dedicated to doing something, and then tasks are what do you need to do during that time, right? So you might have time set aside to go run errands or go to the grocery store, but that list of groceries that you need to get once you get to the grocery store, or that list of errands once you leave your house that you need to accomplish while you're away, those go on your to-do list or planner. So for students, they've been, or hopefully should have been, using a planner all the way up until college. And because their time is mainly managed for them, right? You drop them off at 7:15, 7:30 in the morning, you pick them up at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe later if they have sports practice. And we talked about there's really not that much time to manage. I encourage students to really focus on building their planner skills pre-college. Then we introduce the calendar once they go off to college. And I tell students, I want you to become a robot with a personality, okay? And so we get the calendar on the phone and the computer, tablet, et cetera, all syncing with each other, talking to each other. We build out a calendar for classes. And so here are the classes, the building, the rooms that you need to go to, and then your meal times. Here's where you're going to have your meals every day around that. And now we need to figure out 1 to 2 hours of study time for every 1 hour of instruction. So if you've got 14 hours that you're taking of courses, then you need to have about 30 hours or so at least blocked out for study time, right? And so block out those study times, those big blocks of study time. And then from there, that's when you can start adding those other things. Fitness is important, put going to the gym or going for a run, 3 days a week. If you decide to join a fraternity or something, a sorority, they may have meetings, weekly or certainly monthly, if not weekly. So put those in the calendar. And then it ends up being this colorful, visual aid with alarms and alerts and dings, and it's cloud-based. So if you lose your phone, you get another one, you just put in your information and magically everything is there. And so that is a critical tool. So you have a study time blocked out, but then when you go report to that place outside of the dorm room, by the way, it needs to be, so library, wherever it may be, to do work, when you report to that place, what is the work that you actually have to do? That's where the planner comes in. And there are digital solutions. There's the pen and paper solution that hopefully kids were using and really got comfortable with prior to college. Those are absolutely critical tools as kids go into college. Address book. It sounds silly, but I create a category of students called professors within their contacts or address book. And as they get their professors every semester, they add their contact information, what building and office number they're in case there's office hours, et cetera. I even have a calendar that stays unchecked on their digital calendar called office hours, where every semester they put their professor's office hours in there. So if they ever need to go visit with a teacher, it is super easy to figure out when you have availability that overlaps nicely with when the teacher has availability, your professor has availability. So that address book is really important. It's also a great opportunity before kids go off to college to start putting first names, last names, birthdays of critical family members, so you can be a good nephew, niece, cousin, son, daughter. And so it's super easy to keep up with that stuff. And what's nice is, the computer, whether it's a kind of a Google PC-based system using Google, or whether it's Apple, these talk to each other, right? So you go into your email, you start writing an email to a professor, you write the first 3 letters of the last name, and it finishes it for you, right? Or it pops up on your calendar that it's, your Aunt Susie's birthday, right? To give her a call. So all these things talk to each other. Uh, Organization systems, physical and digital. Okay, so physical is like a binder or folder, whatever they're going to use to bring to class for that physical work that it's still exchanged physically. And then digital, so whether it's Google Drive or some other cloud-based system, Box.net, Dropbox, whatever it may be, there are lots of digital file organization systems. So you can create a folder for each class and subfolders. In some programs like Google Drive, you can even right-click at drive.google.com, create a folder, right-click on it, and change the color. You can color code those folders, right? And label the actual files, name them meaningfully so you can search for them easily, find them, et cetera. And then browser shortcuts. This seems silly too, but a huge time saver over time. Now that there's an increasing amount of work, a growing amount of work that never sees paper, students are accessing the same portals over and over again. This teacher's website, this portal to get homework, this to submit stuff, this to submit your papers to make sure there's no plagiarism. So create browser shortcuts. All these things you can do before college, set up these systems. And these are the very systems that students report to me are the absolute most helpful systems to help them get through college. So as promised, I think we're right on target, about 45 minutes. I wanted to make sure to leave time for some questions. So I'm going to leave this up just for a minute so that if you want my contact information, email is heyevan@seotg.com. That's me directly. If you have any questions about us, our services, we do work with a lot of students who have made that transition to college or are looking to make that transition to college or are pre-college and need help with their habits and routines as far as using a planner and organization, physical organization, digital organization. So info@SAOTG, or that's my office number there. Our website has a wonderful over 200 fantastic blogs with helpful hyperlinks to all research-driven, science-based solutions, programs, tools, things directly out of our program that we do with students, all free. And we have a wonderful newsletter where you can go to the bottom there and sign up for our newsletter. We offer helpful tips on a monthly basis based on the time of year that may be helpful for either your clients, your students, or your children. So I've left this up here for a moment. But I'm going to exit out of here and stop sharing my screen so that we can do some Q&A. Laura, anybody have any questions along the way?
Absolutely. I have some questions too, but we'll start with the audience. I was taking notes on some of these organization tips. So first question, I'm going to combine two here. There was a question about whether all schools have to give accommodations. And then after that, what kind of services are reasonable to expect at most colleges?
What services are reasonable to expect in most colleges? So I'll answer those in order. So it is, there are legal requirements. And so just like pre-college, where public schools, there's a formal process and there are legalities around that process. with regard to formally requesting accommodations and what you have to provide and the forms you have to fill out and the meetings that need to be had and then the actual plans that are created. So there are legalities around that. So, just like you experience pre-college where public schools have a formal process and have to have a formal process for accommodations, private schools typically will also provide accommodations, but the process may not be quite as formal, and every private school may handle it a little bit differently, and they may offer certain accommodations, but not others. And there may be other, schools that might be a better fit that are, that kind of specialize in working with students with certain learning differences. You'll see that same thing as you matriculate to college. So there are certainly legalities around providing accommodations, and there are disability offices. They may be called something a little bit different at every university. And then the private schools, also the private universities will generally, mine certainly did, will have programs for getting accommodations and protocols and committees that meet and approval processes and things like that. So it may look different at private schools than public schools, but generally the answer is yes, you can get accommodations as you matriculate. As far as what was the latter part of that question, Lara?
Yeah. So then what are the kind of support services that are reasonable to expect at a college?
So most colleges are going to have accommodations and support services around extended time is probably one of the most common, a testing center where you can take a test separately from the rest of the class with your extended time. There's also other things that are less common that I would encourage you to ask your testers about, things like priority seating, priority registration. So, typically in order to register for classes on a certain date it opens, seniors are able to register first, and then juniors, and then sophomores, and then freshmen. If you can get an accommodation where you can pre-register even before the seniors, and that's an accommodation that a lot of people don't even know about, and most colleges, if you're psychoeducational testing, neuropsych testing supports an accommodation like that. And by the way, you can go back to the tester and ask them if the testing results, and it needs to be in the last 3 to 4 years, but if those testing results, it may not have been one of the recommended accommodations in there, but if the testing results would support an accommodation like that, your tester may go and revise those recommended
Huh.
accommodations as you matriculate to go to college and add those things. They'll never add something that's not justified by your testing, but college presents new challenges. And so something like priority registration may not even be something relevant pre-college. And so that testing may have been done when you were in 10th grade. And so they didn't even think to address that, right? So you can go back to your tester, schedule an appointment, and oftentimes add some of those things in there if it's justified by the paperwork. Access to teachers' notes is another example. A note taker is another example. Books on tape is another example. So there's lots but the most common is certainly extended time and taking
Mm.
tests in a different room. But flexible deadlines and some of those other things I mentioned are a little bit less common in terms of a lot of people may not know about that, but still many universities, public and private, I had priority registration. I didn't realize it was even possible until halfway through my sophomore year of college, but it was a game changer for me. Priority seating. So there's lots of accommodations there. In terms of other programs, you need to do your research, and educational consultants who specialize in this, visiting colleges, that's what they do, certain days of the week or certain weeks of the year, they're just going visiting college after college. There are colleges that have special programs where they assign you an academic coach that may do some of the things that we do, with students as far as blocking out time and planning out their schedules and helping them with organization. There are some universities and colleges that have more robust support programs like that. But you need to check with those colleges, and you can cheat a little bit by working with a consultant who may have a lot of that information at their fingertips.
Yeah, that I didn't know that you could go back and talk about the evaluations. So that's good to know. And I think you mentioned this in your answer, but someone asked about, is there a rule regarding when testing must be updated before going to college? And I think you said within 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, I would say 3 years is the most
3 years.
common rule. So generally speaking, getting granted accommodations gets increasingly more difficult as kids matriculate, right? So at the elementary school level, it's a matter of having a conversation. Oftentimes, they may not even need testing to back it up just yet. Some learning differences aren't even diagnosed at certain really young ages, right? Once you get to middle school, it's a little bit more formal of a process. It might involve some meetings, et cetera. By the time you get to high school, they're going to want testing to back it up and regular meetings each year to make sure that you're using the accommodations. Do you still need them? Do we need to modify them? Et cetera. By the time you are taking an SAT or ACT standardized tests, they are a lot more strict about and they want to see when was the last time you got tested. They want to see that you've done it in the last 3 to 4 years. They want to see that it was done also 3 to 4 years before that. They want to see that you had accommodations at the high school that you were attending. They want to know what accommodations you were allowed and which ones you were taking advantage of, et cetera, before they consider it. Then when you go to college, it's a similar process, and there's forms, and now students, keep in mind, need to advocate for themselves. So you as a parent or as a support professional can certainly encourage a student to go to that office, and you can help facilitate getting the proper documentation, completing forms, et cetera. But ultimately, a student at the start of every semester is likely going to have to go to that office, get a new set of forms, deliver one copy. It's like one of those old school. There's a white, pink, yellow, and they tear it off. This one goes to the teacher. This one stays in your file at the office. This one you get to keep. It doesn't go into all the details because that's health related, confidential, et cetera. But it just says here are the accommodations that you have been granted, and it's on the student to talk to their professor. And the professor does not have to remember before each test to give a test to the testing center. The student has to approach the professor a week before every test and remind the professor, can you please send a copy of my test to the testing center so that I can schedule a time with the testing center to take this test on my own by myself in quiet, away from other students, and use my extended time. So that burden is shifted very much to the student, that same student that may be diagnosed with attention related learning differences. And so there's some irony there,
Right.
certainly, but the process, it's a lot stricter, than MCAT, GRE, GMAT, LSAT, those graduate level entrance exams. Some of those are like applying to the CIA in order to try and get accommodations, right? So, as you could imagine, anybody taking an MCAT for admission into medical school would appreciate some extra time on that test, right? So there has to be some way to maintain the integrity and efficacy of the tests and the results. So they are only granting those accommodations to people with documented 3 to 4 years saying the exact same thing over and over again, who are using these accommodations. They want to make sure that it is incredibly legitimate. And I've even heard of cases, and I had to do this myself because I took the MCAT actually. I was only granted half of the extended time that I was asking for, and a lawyer had to write a letter. And it just so happened that that same lawyer had just won a huge lawsuit against the company that makes the MCAT exam. And they called me right away and said, oh, I'm sorry, we're happy to reconsider. And then they sent me a letter and approved the entirety of the extended time that I was asking for, because it was justified, right? And so keep that in mind. You're not looking necessarily for something different when you do that testing every 3 to 4 years. You're looking to document that this is pervasive and enduring, right?
You need that history of documentation. Yeah, absolutely. Taking back a step, so we talked about, making sure that you do research and looking into different schools. Someone asked, when they're in that process of looking at different schools and doing that research, should they visit the student services? Should they disclose that there will be a need for accommodations? Is there any concern about disclosing that before applying to a school?
There shouldn't be, and legally there can't be, but I can't tell you whether some schools factor those things in or not. I've heard families that have suspicions about those things, but legally they can't. So I would advise no. The school wants every student to be successful. And if a student is bright, capable, and your application is full of information to corroborate their capability, right? So your grades throughout high school show over a long period of time, can you sustain performance? Your standardized test scores show your ability to take standardized tests and, whatever you did to prepare for those and be in the right mindset to go and perform well. That shows your kind of test taking abilities. Your resume shows what you were involved in terms of work, volunteering, service, et cetera. So they have a pretty good idea of who you are. And if they want you, they want you. And if you're there, they want you to be successful, and they want to provide you with whatever you need in order to be successful. They're maybe for selfish interests, right? They have statistics that publish in books and et cetera. So, but I would say no. I would like to believe that that's true. I'd be lying to you if I told you that I didn't hear suspicions from families based on their experiences. But I think that the answer is yes, you should absolutely visit with those offices and ask questions about what support services they have. And it doesn't just need to be all about learning differences. It could also be, are there in the math building or in the engineering building or the computer science building, are there students who are older, juniors, seniors in college, who have taken certain courses, who are available certain days of the week to help students who are freshmen and sophomores who are taking courses, oftentimes from the same professors, right? And so, what programs do you have for that? What does your Center for Students with Disabilities look like? What kind of accommodations do you guys offer most regularly when justified by the paperwork? And do you have any special programs on campus for academic coaching or those kinds of things? I think those are fantastic questions to ask.
Awesome. You got someone sent in a thank you, very informative. It looks like we have one more question. Looking at Texas in particular, just in your work, are there any colleges in Texas that you've seen that are particularly supportive for students who have dyslexia?
I am not tapped in anymore at the level where I feel really confident, answering that question. And I'd rather be transparent and honest. St. Edward's in Austin, which is, kind of smaller, so if somebody wants to be in Austin, they have lots of friends in UT, St. Edward's is smaller class sizes, smaller campus. I've in my experience, students I've worked with learning differences have thrived there in terms of special programs that they have. I'm not super, familiar with that. So I know folks who may have a really great answer. So feel free to take down my email address, shoot me an email, and I'm happy to try and connect you with one of those people that would certainly be able to answer that question. But I don't want to give you bad information.
Absolutely. And then this is just my curiosity. When you shared those statistics about the amount of students who drop out or go more than once, I mean, I just felt like the air was knocked out of me. Are those numbers reflective of trends over time? Have they increased? What's the historical pattern with that?
Yeah, so there's always somebody that is interested in those statistics because they are alarming. I did on the slide, I put my source there, but yes, this was a pretty robust study from a very reliable source that does lots of statistics in the education sphere and beyond. I have searched using different words and have come up with comparable statistics, but slightly different. So there are different sample sizes, different scales, et cetera. But in my due diligence, it appeared to me to be a pretty robust, reflection. And by the way, I think those numbers are different if you zoom in on students with learning differences or with a history of substance abuse or have already taken some steps, in a bad direction. And I also think in the other direction, those statistics are different if based on what school they're coming from and how they performed in school leading up to college. And if you could somehow zoom in on the subset of students, um, um, whose families went to college or potentially even that college.
Right.
I think that it would skew some of those things, but they they are alarming. Absolutely. But I would encourage you, and if you want to email me separately, you can go back to the recording and get it, or you email me separately, and I'll send you that hyperlink. And feel free to look into that a bit further. But they're absolutely alarming.
Yeah. Okay, Evan. Well, I know we are at time, so we thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We will have this recording available on the Night House YouTube channel. So if you attended tonight and you thought of someone else who you think needs to hear this important information, please be on the lookout to share that. And just a big thank you again to Evan for joining us and sharing this information.
My absolute pleasure. The two nicest things you can give somebody are time and attention, and everybody here gave me both. Lara, thank you for your confidence and for reaching out. Love House, love everything that you guys do, and love these presentations. Happy to come back anytime. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.